She couldn't do this week, and so I think we're just going to have, instead of 2 weeks with her, 1 week. Hold on a second. Selma, she's getting stage fright. So I was hoping at least that my wife could fill in for a little bit, inshallah. I think she's getting nervous. Thank you. Just give me 1 second. I need to pull some stuff off the screen. Okay. Okay. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. Okay, so we have a couple of quick announcements, inshallah. So first, starting next week, we're gonna start at 5 p.m. inshallah. All right, so we're starting at 5 next week. We're gonna take a break for Maghrib, and then we're going to come back until Isha, inshallah. Okay, and because we missed last week, we're gonna add an additional week. So we're going to end on the 5th. Yes, March 5th, inshallah. Say that one more time. Yep. Yes. Here we go. Okay. So we also have a different format for the next few weeks, inshallah. So today we're starting quite late, so we'll see how much of that we can actually do. But the first hour is going to be, so I'm assuming from 5 o'clock until Maghrib, we're going to do a straight lecture. We're not going to do so many questions because the questions are pulling us away from a lot of the content. Then when we come back from Salah, we're going to have 20 minutes or so, 30 minutes of Q&A. And then after that, inshallah, we're going to do the last half hour before Isha is going to be lecture. Activities. Okay, so I want to begin with this, alhamdulillah. this can be quite a touchy issue. The permissibility of seeing the intended sister before you marry her, right? Now, there are some, in my experience so far, more personal differences than differences in terms of differences of opinion in the Sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, it is permissible, but you have to be careful. Brothers, some of you sometimes have said to me, well, I don't want to see her. It's okay. I don't think I need to. And then sometimes the sisters don't want to actually show themselves to the brothers as well, right? And so, again, as I've said with many of these things, you have to have a conversation with each other, right? First and foremost, where does the sister stand? Where do you stand? Now, the reason for that is because a sister might be really concerned, as far as I've experienced, a sister tends to be very concerned that if her brother is not serious, then she doesn't want to take off her hijab and let someone see her and so on and so on, only for the person to just kind of lose interest or disappear or whatever winds up happening, right? And so this might be something that you want to try to make use of when you're all but certain, right? Like you and your families have talked, you do want to marry each other, you've all but set a date and so on. This is pretty serious, with Allah's assistance, you're going to move forward and marry one another, right? So you have to be careful about how you try to address it. Ooh, am I on the wrong one? Yes, okay, there we go. So you have to be careful about how you address it, but for the most part, you want to wait until later on when everyone has been involved, both of you agree and so on. We've kind of gone over these issues. I don't know what's going on with my presentation. A lot of the images are not here, but the one thing that we haven't talked about is the idea of copying the non-Muslims, right? So we talked about kitab, we talked about, the brothers, you do the nikah, but you don't consider it the wedding. The father comes to you. We've talked about what is a wedding Islamically. What is the nikah versus what is the walima. We've talked 2 weeks ago about the mu'akhar. But what we haven't talked about is copying the non-Muslims, right? And so in this instance, you have to be careful. What are the elements in a nikah, right? The elements in a nikah in general is the groom, the bride, her wali or her wakil, and then the witnesses, right? Whoever those witnesses might be. Now, the ceremony itself tends to be relatively simple. And so when I say copying the non-Muslims, what I mean is it's not from Islam. You don't see in Islam that there's a such thing as bridesmaids, right? It's not from Islam. You don't see this kind of thing from the Sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You don't see that there's a best man, right? You don't see any of these kinds of things, right? And so I'm telling you, fundamentally, what you find in the Sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the groom, the bride, the wali or the wakil, and then the two witnesses. Obviously, our families and friends, they attend, but there's no official role, right? Nobody has a particular role. There's not a whole bunch of speeches and all of those other things, right? That is somewhat unusual. It's only really since we've seen a lot of the non-Muslims doing it that we've taken it on, right? But that's not necessarily something that's from the Sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, the marriage contract is a must. Now, I'm going to ask you, this is not the Q&A part, but I'm going to ask you questions. What goes into the marriage contract? Yes. The mahar goes into the marriage contract. Let's lock it in, right? Thank you. That's everything, right? Any specific details that the husband and the wife agree to? Who works, how much and where, child caring, child rearing, all of those things go into the wedding contract. What are some more examples of what goes into the wedding contract? What do you mean by that? Oh, we're going to get in trouble with this again. So again, but you have to be careful. Again, we have to be, when you say what would happen after the divorce, you have to remember, how do you know what would happen after the divorce? And the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam has forbidden us from making agreements on the unseen. So you have to be careful about what kinds of things you're agreeing on, whether or not they would be based on the ghaib. Does that make sense? I think one of the best things that you can do, especially with divorce, is to put it in the contract in terms of Quran and Sunnah, right? Because those things are indisputable. Some of the other stuff, again, we went over the mu'akhar, even an issue of like who gets to live in the house, all of those kinds of things. You can't go wrong with putting what Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said about the divorce, right? If you stick to that, that should be the basis from everything else you go for. So you don't have to get into some of these other details, right? Again, because it's hard to go into an agreement based on something that you don't know, right? You both live in an apartment and you wrote in a wedding contract who gets to keep the house. You don't live in a house, right? Does that make sense? I saw another hand. What else goes into the wedding contract? Yes. Signatures of witnesses. If the sister wants to go to college. Huh? Correct. Right? All of those things, how many children you all agree to have, at least to the best of your ability, we are agreeing that we would like to have this many children. Allah knows best what you're going. We agree right now in this moment that this is what we like. You said you never what? What did you have in the contract? Woo! Okay. Yes, sister. No, because we can agree to what we want now. We agree. So, like, for instance, my wife and I, when we got married, I said I would prefer to have 4 children. Right? We can agree that I've said that to you. That's what I would like to have. We agree that I would like to have that. What we have 2 children, right? Like, you know what I mean? I'm not holding that to, we can't. So this isn't an agreement that it would be different for me to say, you're agreeing to have 4 children for me. That's you agreeing to do something that you have no idea whether Allah is going to bless you in that way. That's not what I'm saying, right? Any of those things, like, so for instance, you wanting to go to school, how do we know if you're going to go to school or not? We don't know, right? But we can agree that you want to go. Those types of things should be in the marriage contract. I know. You can always divorce them and then show back up the next day. Right? And so, yes. No, I mean, obviously, this is the mawadda and the rahma between you two. Right? Because again, there's always, after you get married and you see what the landscape really looks like. Right? So that obviously, my wife, just to be honest, right? So my wife, again, we talked about this the last time I was here. My wife, she said that Hajj was to be her mahr, right? Alhamdulillah. But she said, she told me, I think a month or so ago, she said, I freed you from that responsibility, I don't know, maybe I forget what she said, like not long after we got married or something or other like that, right? That she was like, he takes me or not, it's okay. Alhamdulillah, obviously I'm going to take her, right? And so those things change after you get married. And so you always want the right to revisit it. But the things that are important, you should put in your contract because you don't want to try to renegotiate it later. Because now I'm just, as a man, I'm going to feel trapped. I want to feel like I married you. We put all this stuff in the contract. And then now that we're together, then you come to me again. We talk about, the mahar from my previous marriage turned into Bora Bora the day of the nikah. Right. But that's not fair to me. We agreed. We put all of this stuff down. We brought everybody here. We had the witnesses. I'm walking in the masjid. You tell me you want a different mom. Right. Yes. Yes. Right. Everyone should have a contract. This is the sunnah of the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And put in there the things that are important to you and try not to overlook things that you think, oh, well, we don't need to discuss that. So we already agree on it, because sometimes you can agree in principle on something, but mean two totally different things with one another. Yes. Not that I know of. Yes. I have to think of what those are. I have to get back to you. I don't remember. Right? But we know the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he commanded us to do this. And so you should have it. And obviously your family members should look at them and so on. Right? Because again, as you can see from the sisters, they said what was in the marriage contract, the mahar and the muakhar, and then the signatures for the witnesses. That's nothing. And so anything that you want in a relationship after y'all get married, you're starting from, yes, you got to fight over it, which is what it's meant to protect you from. Right? It's meant to protect you from that, so that we all agree, we've had the conversation ahead of time and so on. Everybody with me? Yes? Okay. I'm going to try to move fast. What time is Isha? Still 7:30. Okay. We've gone over the witnesses for the contracts, right? And we've gone over this. Now, this point of having the walima, you're not going to not have, it seems like, you're not going to not have a walima. You must have something of a walima. Now, in a lot of cultures, right, the walima is called the wedding, right? But I'm going over this specifically so that we understand it in Islamic terms, not necessarily cultural terms, right? Because the walima, it serves a purpose. And so you have to make sure that you have done something to serve the purpose, right? So for instance, some good friends of mine, they got married sometime, I want to say last year, right? Maybe in September. I think they got married in September of last year, right? So we all gathered in a masjid place like this. We all sat, there was maybe 50 people, 75 people there. We all witnessed it. There was food. The imam came, the witnesses signed, all of those kinds of things, right? So that's a nikah. And they had food, but then they decided after that, they're not going to have a wedding. Right? They say, oh, we're not going to do the whole big thing with the balloon. We're not going to do all of that. But what they did might have been sufficient as a walima, because all of us were there, all their family, friends, loved ones, whoever would have come to the wedding, attended the celebration after the nikah, which is the walima. It might not necessarily have been their intention, but a lot of times we're already doing that, because the intention of the walima is to make it known to the community that these two people are husband and wife. That is the purpose of the walima. It's not to show off. It's not so you can pull up in a nice rental car that's better than, Ami Ahmed's son who got married 2 months ago, right? Am I touching a nerve with this? Oh, no. right? It's so that the people can know that you are married. Now, I touched on this last time, right? That I was here when I explained the story of the sister who, when she was getting married to the brother, he said to her, "You can't question any of my family members about me. We know this is from the sunnah you're supposed to. You can't question any of my friends about me. We know this is from the sunnah that you're supposed to." He said, "Don't invite anyone to the nikah. Don't post it on social media. Don't do any of that. No one can be there, just the people that are going to sign." And to the degree that when people showed up, I think it was just 3 extra people. It was the sister getting married, the brother getting married, the woman whose house they had it at, her husband who was the wakil for the sister, and then I think they invited 2 or 3 other people. And the brother was very upset that those 2 or 3 other people came. Right? Because he's trying to keep it. It turned out he's trying to keep it a secret that he's marrying the sister. This is the opposite of the sunnah. The sunnah is you have to make it known. The people need to know that you two are married. What would be a person's reason for keeping a nikah secret? Right? I would imagine to some degree it would be hard to explain it as a good one. Right? So you must make sure to have a walima. Okay. Now, this is the portion where I want to remind the women that I can fight. Marrying multiple women. Right? Marrying. Look at that. Look at. Oh, now suddenly my wife is here. She's like leaning over her chair. Suddenly she's here. She tapped out on me. She set me up. She was supposed to be here. She talked a good game on the way here the past couple of days. And then now we're here. She's going to come running up here, and, you know. Yeah. So I'm going to remind you of what my wife reminds me, right? Allah Azza wa Jal, He says that you can marry up to 4 women if and only if you can be fair to them, right? If and only if you can be just to them, right? So you have a responsibility, brothers. You have a responsibility if you have it within yourself that you want to, or you think someday in the future you might want to. If you think you want to marry more than one woman, I think it is important, right? It is nowhere in the sunnah that you have to tell this woman per se, like before you get married and all these kind of things, but it's good to know. It's good to talk to her about what your intentions are. This is part of transparency. This is part of finding out whether you're compatible with each other, right? Because a woman might say, well, I don't want to marry someone who wants to marry someone else or is even open to the idea. And so telling someone up front that this might be something you're interested in is important to do, right? And so it is your right, but you must understand that whatever one has, the other must have. And that is in all affairs. Right? If you buy one blue shoes, you have to buy the other blue shoes. One gets a 3,000 square foot house, the other gets a 3,000 square foot house, obviously, if she wants those things. But you must be just. You must be just in your time, in your love, your affection, all of those things. And Allah Azza wa Jal, obviously, as my wife explains to me, Allah says you'll never be able to be truly just. So that's her way of saying, so you can never marry another woman, right? But the reality of it is that it is something that is permissible in Islam, right? It can be something that's not for you, right? I guess that is the best way to put it. But it is not haram because it is not for you, right? And I would encourage the both of you, the woman and the man, to talk to each other very, very openly about it, right? You must discuss this very clearly with one another. A woman saying that she is open to you marrying another woman, right, doesn't mean that if you wind up marrying another woman that it's going to feel good and that she's not going to have any feelings or emotions or resentment, anger, frustration, or hurt about it. Brothers, I advise you, if there's any part of you that wants to marry more than one woman, you have to be incredibly emotionally intelligent. right? Because there is a lot of frustration, there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of jealousy, there's disappointment, there's heartache there. And so, as a man, you must be willing, even for a woman who says that you can do it. And I'm going to give you an example. I had a woman call me, and she's in tears. She called me in tears already, right? And she's like, "Oh, Dr. Ray, I talked to you, I talked to you, I talked to you." Okay. My husband is taking another wife. Okay. Explain it to me, sister. What's going on? So I'm my husband's second wife. This is what the woman is saying. I'm my husband's second wife. And I had problems with his first wife when I married him. It was hard on her and there was some tension between us. Right? Now we got married. We solved all of that. She told her husband, my best friend so-and-so is such a righteous sister. Let me get through it. And remember, I'm not the one who married, right? That's just not me. My best friend is such a righteous sister, and you're a good man. I think you would be good together with each other. Maybe you should marry her. Take note of the reactions, brothers. And so he said, okay. He said, okay, hold on. He said, okay. And then he married her. And he married her. And the sister, she felt incredibly betrayed. Huh? By both of them. By both. And mind you, hold on a second. Hold on. Mind you, she married him and he was already married. So she knows what it means to come in. She watched another woman go through this. And so you would think she would be the most prepared to go through it. Right? The reason I'm saying all of this to you is because emotions are very real. Right? The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he prevented Ali from taking a second wife when he was married to his daughter, to the daughter of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, well, because what hurts her hurts me. Right? So he prevented Ali from having, he was proposed by another family to marry another woman. And the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, no, I won't allow him to do that. And so and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, did he have more than one wife? Yes. And so the reason I'm going over this is to say to you that the emotions that are associated with polygyny they're not linear. They're incredibly complicated and they don't have to make sense. And you have to be prepared emotionally, mentally, and emotionally that if you want to marry more than one person, or you want to marry someone who's already married, or marry someone who's open to marrying another woman, you really got to understand that there is a psychological context that you're okay with mentally, but emotionally, you really don't know what you're going into. It's like the time before you get married, and then you get married, you live in the same house, you find there's different emotions that come up that you have to adjust to. This is the same thing. I've had many women say to me, no, I'm okay with entering into polygyny, and then they marry into it, and then they realize, and then they give me a million different excuses for why they're acting the way they're acting. And I'm like, sister, is it that you just don't like polygyny? And she doesn't want to say it because she's been saying all this time that she's okay with it. It's okay to not be okay with it, right? It's okay for it to be too hard on you, but you must really, really talk openly with each other. And sisters, you must marry a man who understands his responsibility. You must marry a man, brothers. Marrying a second wife isn't because your first wife makes you angry or because you have problems, right? Because all you're going to do is just either be the same person with the new wife, right? Or punish this other woman, right? There are many, many reasons to marry more than one woman, but you have to be mindful about why you're doing it, right? It's not out of spite. It's not to harm another person. It's not for any of those other kinds of reasons. Again, I had a sister once who she wanted to marry me. She was much older than me even at the time, and she couldn't have children. And so when we sat with each other, she was like, "Look, I'm at an age where I can't have children anymore. So if you marry me, you must understand that if you want children, you have to marry someone other than me." Right? And so this is what she said. This is the first thing she said. We sat down with each other. Right? And so you must be willing and able to have an adult conversation with each other, and to be as responsible as you can, and to not think with your desires and your hormones. Right? I'm going to open any thoughts or reactions while I switch over presentations. Yes. If y'all agree to, that, I can tell you as a man, I would never give. It depends on what you mean. What do you mean? If a man, so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said the opposite of this, right? He said that a woman cannot stipulate that in order to marry her, you must divorce whoever you're married to, right? And that's not your question. I understand that. But I'm just saying that because we have to be careful, right? A woman can't say, well, you want to marry me? That means you got to divorce your wife now. That's not permissible to do. Now, if the both of you agree, if you say to a man, if you marry me, I don't want you to marry anyone else, and he agrees to that, alhamdulillah, you write it in the contract. Y'all agreed. I can tell you for myself, I would never agree to that. Right? I would never agree. Only in principle, because I wouldn't give up I've never asked a woman. I didn't ask my wife to give up any of her rights. I would not give up any of mine. And I've had several opportunities to marry another woman since we've been married. Right? But I always, give an excuse. I always make something up. Right? But I'm not interested. Instead of saying I'm not interested, I just make something else so the sister doesn't get offended. Right? But me not giving up that right doesn't mean I have an intention to marry somebody else. Right? And so that's why you got to have a conversation with your brother. On principle, I just don't want to give up my right. Right? Do I want to marry another woman? Brothers, I'm married. They say, you want to get married again? A woman? I'm married to the game. Okay, I'm trying to move fast because I know that we started late. What kinds of questions should I ask? Right? Now, haya is very important Islamically. Right? We know the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was more shy than a virgin girl. Right? He was more shy than a virgin girl. So that means for the most part, you want to ask your questions in the most respectful way that you can. But if something is important for you to know, then you have to find a way eventually in an appropriate time to ask that question. Right? Especially if it's something that's incredibly important. But remember, you do want to respect the boundaries that Allah Azza wa Jal has set between a man and a woman. And so for the most part, I want to say to you that there's not a lot of questions that are off limits. I'm trying not to say there are no questions that are off limits. There's not a lot of questions that are off limits. In my experience, it has been about how you ask it, right? And you should not avoid asking a question for fear of losing the relationship. right? I don't want to bring this issue up because what if the person, it's a deal breaker and they decide they don't want to talk to me anymore, or they get upset or this or that. And, we talked about this, I think a couple of weeks ago, talked about how much money does the guy make or how much money does the woman make, right? They could potentially get offended. I've known a lot of people that get offended by that question. Maybe you don't walk into day one with a question like that, right? But eventually you're going to have to come to it. And if a person feels offended, alhamdulillah, conflict around the questions that you ask when you're getting to know each other, believe it or not, is healthy. A lot of couples don't want to have conflicts with each other, so they kind of tiptoe around issues. But in order for you to get married to each other, in terms of finding out if you're compatible or not for marriage, you can't just find out if you're compatible for getting along. You must find out if you're compatible in facing difficult issues and resolving conflict. It might be that as a couple, you get into a conflict and you realize your conflict resolution style is different from each other, or you don't even have one and you just fight. Can you two, as two adults, learn a way to effectively handle differences, disputes, frustrations that come up with each other? Can you get comfortable and secure enough in your connection to each other to be able to do that? Because that is very telling about your ability to have a successful, compatible marriage too, right? So I would advise you, do not avoid questions for the sake of maintaining a relationship, because that question that you're avoiding is probably very important, and you're probably going to face it the moment you get married. Right? Again, I mentioned this a couple of weeks back when I said that people have to. I know one brother, he asks for anyone who comes to marry any of his daughters, he asks for a screening for any diseases, any sexually transmitted diseases. He does ask for that. He asks for a criminal background check. All of these things he asks for. He wants to know, like, what do you do professionally? Are you in school? All of those he asks all of that information, even just for you. If you come to ask for her hand, you've got to come with that after. You come ask for his daughter, he's going to say, okay, the next time I see you, you need to bring me this, that, and this and that. That's going to weed a lot of brothers out. A lot of people not going to want to present that. But he's doing it for a reason, because you have to have a degree of security with the person that you're talking to, right? So what kinds of questions? I'm going to put it to you this way. We only have 1.5 hours left. What kinds of questions would you be shy to ask? And I think, Ahmed, did you work out the phone number thing where people can type stuff? You sure? Only because I feel like some people might be too shy to say what it is. Yes. Yes, asking about, and this is a major issue. This is a major issue. Asking about someone's past. And when you say about someone's past, can you be indelicate? You're not sure about what about it? Yeah. You can ask, and see, this is the thing. We got into a big fight and want to talk about this. You're allowed to ask. The person doesn't have to answer. The women were fighting with me about can I ask a guy about whether he's had girlfriends in the past or not, right? And I said, you can ask him whatever you want, but their question was, does he have to answer it? And I said, no, right? Obviously, no one has to answer anything, right? No one has to answer it. Oh, look at that. Oh, look, we're going high tech. Can y'all see this? Can y'all see? I'm going to read it. This is quite low tech. He had 2 weeks to figure this out. Okay. So 786-519 3848. One more time. Now, sisters and brothers, don't be shy to ask me for the number because we don't know which question is yours, even if you ask for the number or not. So you can, I'm going to repeat it, but I'm just saying for people like, oh, I didn't get the number. I don't want to ask. Ask because we don't know if it's your question or not. 786-519-3848. I'll repeat it again if anybody wants to know. Okay. So yes, I think if you there are some women. So for instance, and again, I felt like I've mentioned this, right? We kind of cover a lot of these topics through a lot of the questions that you have asked before. Asking about the past is all of these things are incredibly important. And I'll tell you why. Again, there was one brother who I know who, you know, he messed around before he got married and he wound up getting HPV, right? And you don't have symptoms of that as a man. It's rare to have symptoms. And so you can have it's an infection, right? You can have the infection and not have any symptoms. But in women, if she gets the infection, it has the potential to lead to cervical cancer, other kinds of reproductive problems, right? And so the brother, alhamdulillah, he found the error in his ways. He returned back to Allah, trying to be the most righteous brother he can be after he lived a life where he wasn't as dutiful to Allah as he should have been. He married a sister who was a virgin. They consummate the marriage. I don't know how she wound up getting tested for it, but it came back positive, whatever the circumstances were, right? She's destroyed. She's distraught, tears. I mean, every time I talk to her, it's just devastation, right? I'm sure she would have wanted to know that, right? I'm sure she would have wanted to know that. And so if a person's past is incredibly important to you, then yes, you should ask the questions that you need to know, right? And if a person has been active in the past, you might want to say to them, listen, I'm not here to judge you. Alhamdulillah, you're back on your journey to Allah. It's not a deal breaker for me, but what I will ask for is that you do get tested for different STDs and STIs. I just want to make sure, I'm coming into the situation with a clean bill of health. I want to make sure you're coming into it with a clean bill of health too. Right? You should, again, this is about being an adult. You should have those conversations if you really need to. Again, another brother married a sister. Again, I mentioned this the last time. Her husband was cheating on her. They got divorced. She got a disease and didn't know. Married my friend. And then now he has the disease and neither one of them can be cured of it. Right? May Allah bless their marriage, and build love between them. That, if they both have the same disease and it's not some terminal thing, that they can get past it. They love each other. It's not going to impact their lives in like a much more serious way, right? But again, obviously, I'm sure that he would have wanted to know. We sometimes don't think about these things, and so you must ask every question that you can think of. Any question that's important to you, ask it. Yes. I'm going to pretend I'm in the fantasy land that you're in, right? When you say you keep asking questions. Asking questions usually lasts like the first 3 weeks, and then you decide that you both like each other, and then the hair twirling commences, right? Like when I was like, oh, how was your day? What was your day? Did you see the thing I sent you from Instagram? How are you? The nicknames come out only after 3 weeks. So in general, what I would say is you must always be doing the work, right? And questions are always going to continue to come up. You should be constantly working on things as you're getting to know each other and working out issues and talking about differences and all of those kinds of things, right? Because all of this must get settled as you're getting to know each other, right? As issues arise, because sometimes it's not always a question, but it's an addressing of an issue, right? Does that make sense? Again, culture is something that's incredibly important to talk about, right? You should be talking with each other about your cultures, even if you're from, ethnically the same background, right? We're both. I'm going to answer your question, but I love this. Susie Ishmael, she she mentioned this one time in one of her talks. So she's from, I forget where. I think her husband is from Alexandria, and then like her family is from another part of Egypt. And she said this one time. She said, and my grandmother called to say, I heard that you're going to be in an interracial marriage, right? Because they were from two different parts of Egypt, right? And so, but that's probably because, hold on, that's probably because the cultural differences between those two cities might have appeared to her to be so great that it feels like you're marrying someone who's almost like from a different country, right? You two, you might both be Palestinian, right? But you have two totally different ways of identity. Like one of you might be more American than Palestinian, one might be more Palestinian than American. And you have different attachments to different levels of the culture. And so you have to talk about what that's going to look like for the both of you, right? I would encourage you as a husband and a wife, you should talk with each other before you get married about the different Islamic rulings and whose opinion is what. You must talk about these kinds of things. You don't want to get married to someone and then you cut on Beyonce and then this person says to you, oh, music is haram, cut that off. You don't want that to be the case, but you're 25, right? Like, how do you not listen to music? You're 25, right? Don't make these assumptions with one another, right? Talk about any and every question that you might have. Yes, brother. I mean, in general, yes. You should do your best to avoid having these like platonic friendships for no reason. Yes. I'm not. The reason I'm trying to answer that so clearly is so that you don't start to fight with each other. Again, I've mentioned this before. You're trying to find out if you're compatible with each other. You don't want to force each other into a box. You have to be careful of that because you're just going to resent each other. Um, I had this conversation with a close friend of mine, right? You picked a woman who doesn't cover, who doesn't pray, and who has a whole bunch of guy friends and hangs out with them all times of the night, all days of the week, right? But you want a woman who covers, who prays, and who doesn't have any guy friends. Why are you pushing her into that box to marry her? Right? And obviously the answer is because he came to like her. Now that I like her, she's got to be everything I want. That's part of the problem. Try not to start with like being in love first, because when you're in love first, you're just going to fight with each other. You want to talk to each other about, and it's not to say that you can't have differences with each other and that you can't work with and negotiate with each other. They work with each other, they negotiate with each other. It was a hard battle, but they got to a place where they both agreed. Alhamdulillah. But in general, you don't want to just find somebody. You don't want to say, I'm going to marry her and then try to make her into all of the things you want her to be. Does that make sense? she should either be or not be those characteristics in the first place, or want those things in the first place. Is she someone who, now obviously, alhamdulillah, the sister, she covers now, she prays now, she don't hang out with other guys. So it is possible, right? But you have to be careful of kind of setting a trap for yourself where you're headed in the wrong direction in the first place, right? The first thing that makes you interested in a person should be that they've kind of covered a lot of the bases that you're looking for in a person. If you cannot agree with each other, don't force it. Maybe you guys are not compatible with one another. Does that make sense? Right? Again, I went to meet with a sister. She really had no direction in her life, and she was trying to find her direction, and that was her honest answer. And I could have said, okay, I'll be patient with you. I'll marry you, and I'll be with you until you find a direction in life. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to marry someone. I knew my direction. I wanted to marry somebody who knew her direction. And so I had to probably, I'm not interested. I'm sorry. She has a lot more growing, and she's discovering herself. She's got a little more developing to do as a person, right? Yes. I think you're asking, so you have to be careful about these hard and fast questions. So then you shouldn't compromise on it, right? The other brother I know, he worked with the sister on it. And then they both came to an agreement. Correct. 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 And if you're satisfied with those answers and you feel like you're ready to be patient and so on, then fine. Alhamdulillah, you should move forward with each other. Right. But in general, if you know you have deal breaking, that might not be your deal breaker issue. You might have other, like your deal breaker might be drugs. You know what I mean? So there are some people who, let's say, you meet a sister or a brother, they use medical marijuana. Right. And so it's not like they're just a pothead doing pot. But you might say, no, for any reason, I don't want to kind of deal with it. I don't want to welcome that into my life and so on. The person might say, yeah, I know it's haram, but I have a condition and it really helps me with this and that. Okay, fine. That's what you're into. But for myself personally, I just don't want to open that door. Right. And again, I put here in this question, what do you really want to know? When someone asks you a question, sometimes you want to clarify with them. What do you really want to know? Because sometimes they're shy, they kind of get in here. Ask directly, what do you really want to know? Is there something that you're really getting at? Because I want to be direct with you. I want you to feel like you can be direct with me. I'm not going to be insulted or offended. Or if I am insulted or offended, I can talk to you about it. I can tell you, and I hope that you can let me know if I ask something along the same lines. Right? But you must ask questions. Every question that you can think of, write it down. Right? And go over it with the person and let a person maybe sometimes take time to get back to you. Not everybody has an answer for every question you ask. Not everybody is kind of avoiding you or being deceptive because they're not answering your question. Sometimes people genuinely haven't thought of something and need some time to really kind of think about it. Right? Or you might ask them a question about something that they themselves are trying to actively work through. Yes. You could. I mean, number one, the wali should be a witness to whatever you ask anyway. Someone should be a witness to any question that you ask, right? Because you shouldn't be talking to the person in general. You shouldn't be talking to the person one-on-one. It might be like, let's say we all go out to Applebee's and I'm sitting at a separate table and you're sitting with my daughter talking to her at a different table. That's your opportunity to ask some of the more like sensitive stuff. But in general, you got to understand that you're going to be talking to this person with other people that are involved, right? Yes. Yeah. Exactly those, right? The one thing that we overlook a lot is personal growth and development, right? Who do you want to be and become as a person? Who do you want to be and become professionally? Spiritually, who are you now? Who do you want to be and become, right? Who are you in your family right now? And who do you want to be and become, right? Yes. you you got to decide if that's something you feel like you can live with. Because if you're going to continue to grow, that person is going to get smaller, right? So, for instance, if you stand where you are and I walk away, you're going to get smaller. And am I going to be okay with you as more distance grows between me and you on that aspect? Sometimes you might not be able to, and you're predicting as best as you can, but you want to say, like, is how much is this going to matter to me in the future? To me, that's a very I'm very big on accountability. I'm very big on being driven. I'm very big on being goal oriented, right? So I can't be with somebody who's just kind of, I'm just here, you know what I mean, with no purpose. And so but you got to have an honest conversation with the person. And the person, again, because they might like you, they might say, okay, and then they kind of develop purpose overnight. I found my calling, right? Like, don't leave me. Again, you got to have a clear conversation. Don't marry them until you feel satisfied that the person is really genuinely working toward where they're supposed to be. Ahmed, are there any questions? No? No questions came in? Okay. Right? So intentions. Intentions. A person's intentions are going to be very, very, very clear. Right? Ladies, a man who wants to marry you, he's going to move like a man who wants to marry you. What does that mean? It means exactly that. He's not going to be dragging his feet. He's not going to be struggling to get him. He's not going to do any of that. He wants to marry you. He's going to move like he wants to marry you. I just had a kind of brother. It's the same thing with a sister. Because sisters do the same thing too. They want to boo. They don't want to get married. You know what I mean? So they'll hit you with well, we can't tell my dad until, like, I'm 100% sure about you. Right? I've seen this a million times. Are you raising your hand? Or are you just stretching your hand? Okay. All right. And I just had this happen with another brother, unfortunately. Him and his sister broke up. And he and I had to have the honest conversation about, did you really intend to marry this sister? Right? And he's like, maybe not. But he's only honest about it after they already slept with each other. Right? After he already dragged his feet to get his family on board with marrying her. After he dragged his feet with the bridal gift, after he dragged his feet with everything, he got what he wanted with the sister, and then suddenly their relationship took a turn for the worse, and then he let it go. And I said to him, you was just messing around with her. Right? And he says, yes. He wouldn't admit it. If I'd asked him 3 weeks before then, he would tell you, no, I'm serious. I really want to marry her. I'm going to make this work. And it's only until after he gets what he wants, and then after he breaks up with her, that he's like, yeah, that was the case. But he knew it within himself already. And so you have to pay attention to what a person's intentions are. And they're going to be showing you by the way that they move. This is what the Quran and the Sunnah is for. Is a person sticking to the Sunnah? Is he doing everything the way that he's supposed to and the way that Allah is pleased with? Because that person is serious. If you have a question, is that what that means? I never understand what your signals mean. Every week we have this conversation. Yes. And then we have to stop in a couple of minutes for the Salah is going to be time. Oh, look at my phone. Sorry. We got to work this out. I think we got to practice this. I know I keep doing it every week. I'm sorry. I'm going to learn one day. Yes, brother. Brother, you had a question. I would personally myself. Number one, make it istikhara. If you have a question that you're not sure about, Make istikhara. I want to talk to this person about it, but I'm not sure how it's going to go over. Make istikhara. Think about how you want to say it. Think about how you want to word it. Talk to the person about your intentions before you ask. Listen, I have a very serious question, but I don't want to offend you. I want you to understand where I'm coming from. And so I've made dua about this, and but it is very important to me, right? Because you should ask those kinds of questions. People come from households that have a lot of trauma, right? And you don't want to be marrying somebody who's they're holding on to holding their sanity together by a thread. And then you marry them, and then you see everything behind the scenes that the person's life emotionally is all discord, it's in disarray. Right. So you do to some degree want to ask, right? And their families are going to show you again, this is kind of stuff you can't hide. Okay. Okay, so I personally I would ask, but obviously I would make it istikhara. I would do a lot of reflecting. I would try to word that question as best I can, and I would try to introduce that question as best as I can, right? And understand that the person might not want to answer that. They might say, "Oh, that's not something I want to talk to you about," and then you have to decide for yourself: Am I okay with that? Because if you're not, then you might have to say, "Look, sister, it's your right to not talk to me about that. I understand that you might feel like that's none of my business, but to me, this is an important thing, and I'm not trying to apply pressure to you for you to tell me when I say to you, I have to let the relationship go. I'm not trying to do that. I'm not trying to blackmail you into talking to me about it. I'm just telling you that this is so important that I can't move forward if we can't talk about this, right? And leave it there. I'll take one more question, and then there's an announcement, inshallah. No other question. Okay. um how does the brother see himself as a husband? What's his responsibility to you emotionally? What's his responsibility to you financially? What's his responsibility to support your dreams and aspirations? Um, how does he envision the collaboration between a husband and a wife in leading a marriage? Right? Are we partners in this? Are we creating the direction of our family, or is this the military and I just snap into position? Right? What does he understand of the relationship between the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his wives? Has he studied them? Can he tell you stories about interactions between the Prophet and his wives? How they had good times, how they resolved conflicts, all of those things. He should know these things off the top of his head and be incredibly invested in the sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And he should show you that through everything that he says and does, right? It can't be, oh, when I marry you, I'm going to suddenly stop smoking hookah, right? Again, I said this, I think, the last time that I was here, right? Who was he 3 months before you met him? That's who he is, right? And so you should talk to him about what's his responsibility to his family and his mother and his father and his siblings, right? How does he see his responsibility to your family and to your siblings, your mother and your father, right? What does he understand of parenting, right? What's his religious responsibility in the house? How much Quran does he know, right? Is he actually studying the religion? What are his grades in college, right? Does he have good grades? A lot of brothers is like, yeah. Does he have good grades? Again, I want to tell you that a sister, remember I said this a couple of weeks ago, a sister, she said, um, you know, her boyfriend, it's her boyfriend. Her boyfriend told her that we can't get married until I finish law school. But he can't get past the MCAT to get in. Is it the MCAT? What is it? The LSAT. He can't get past the LSAT to get in law school. So y'all ain't even on the road to, you know what I'm saying, to getting married, right? And so and she tells me all kinds of things. She's like, she sees a lot of red flags that she's ignoring. You know what I'm saying? And so I would ask a brother how does a brother handle conflict? Right? Does he handle conflicts with wisdom, with maturity? Is he responsible? But is he somebody who's not afraid to defend you? Right? Because you might not want to be with a guy who won't defend you. So I know we got to stop here, inshallah. We'll come back. We'll stop here. Bismillah. When we come back, hopefully my wife will join us next time. Uh Okay. آمين سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. شكرا بقى. How are you doing? You all right? I'm going to figure it out one day.